Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. My guest this week is Meredith Jaffé. Meredith is a presenter and facilitator as well as the author of two stunning novels, The Fence and The Making of Christina, published by Pan MacMillan. Welcome, Meredith.
Hi, Claudine. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, Meredith, I met you at a gorgeous lunch event late last year at which you talked about your latest novel, The Making of Christina. And having read The Fence not long before that, I could not have imagined a more different direction for your second novel. It wasn't what I was expecting. Now, was that a deliberate decision on your part or more of a case of the next story that you needed to tell?
Actually, it's the other way around. So when I signed my contract with Pan MacMillan, it was a 2-book deal, and that contract was based on The Making of Christina. As part of the submissions process, my agent asked me to write a synopsis of The Fence, which I did. And then when Pan MacMillan came back to me, they said, look, we love Christina, it's fabulous, but as a first book, it might be a bit heavy for some people. And we rather like this idea of The Fence. Would you mind writing that one first? So of course I said yes, because as you well know, as an unpublished author, you'll say whatever it takes to get yourself published, basically. Sure. And so I then had to turn around and write the other book really quickly. And I wrote The Fence in the June of 2015 so that I could submit it for I think I had to submit it by the November. So, yeah, it was all a bit full on. So it looks like it also makes me look like I'm highly productive because I had a book out 1 year, 2 years in a row. So yes, it is. The subject matters are worlds apart in one sense. I think the difference is that The Fence allowed me to be funny and to have humour and to shine a light on some of our ridiculous behaviour when we get ourselves in a pickle, whereas I felt that with Christina there was very little scope for humour. And as a writer, I have to say my natural tendency is towards humour. Writing those darker books takes a lot more out of you in one sense because you're inhabiting the skin of someone whose life is a misery and is struggling to find a way out of that. But it also lets you explore greater empathy, I think, to write about a difficult and dark subject. So, yeah, that very different writing experiences. One, and also I might say, as many first-time novelists will actually understand, is that Christina was like 10 years of my life, and whereas The Fence was probably 18 months of my life. So the books come from very different places and times in my life too.
For the benefit of people who haven't read it, can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Christina is the story of a woman called Christina who falls madly in love with a married man who's incredibly wealthy. And eventually, after many years of being his mistress, he declares that he is leaving his family, that he wants to be together, whisks her off, and she has a 2-year-old daughter when they first meet. So he whisks them off to effectively the castle in the sky, off to this beautiful country property and to this idyllic life. And the wheels fall off the day that she gets a phone call from her daughter's school to say that the daughter thinks that she is pregnant. And as they investigate that further, she discovers that the perpetrator is not one of the boys from school, but in fact her long-term partner. Now, I'm not giving anything away. There's no spoilers in that because, as you well know, it's right there in chapter 1. Yep. What interested me about the story was this age-old question about how do you live with yourself, having known that under your roof, in your home, in the place that is supposed to be a sanctuary, that this terrible crime has been committed over a period of 6 years in this particular case. And how do you ever resolve that guilt? How do you retain or rebuild the relationship with your child and also with yourself? Like that sense of trusting your instincts must go straight out the window. So I really wanted to explore the aftermath of that kind of crime rather than the crime itself.
Yes, and I think at the time when I met you, I had said to you that as a mother, I found that subject matter to be quite a confronting one. And you've dealt with some very, serious and potentially traumatic themes in this book. And so I wondered, as a writer, how did you get yourself into this headspace, and how did you cope emotionally with writing about this subject matter?
The things I actually found, it's very confronting doing the research. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I have been to court as a witness in a crime, but I have not been, the victim of that particular crime. That was nothing to do with this subject matter. But obviously, as we would all know, that you cannot read transcripts of child sexual assault cases for obvious reasons. The children are protected, their identity is protected, and those transcripts are not available to the general public. But what you can read is judicial reform reports, people who work in the field, so police, psychologists, social workers, all sorts of people who surround this whole very difficult issue of how you run court cases for child sexual assault when the victim is often very, very young and obviously very vulnerable, and the court system is not designed for children. And that was also very traumatic, though, to read some of the examples that they use in all these reform papers about what is going on in courts, and not just the actual crime that is being tried, but also the injustice of a judicial system which is filled with people who also have personal opinions about consent or about contributing to circumstances of the crime. So I found that really heavy to deal with and to really think about, and then trying to find a way to express that in the narrative. So I really picked out of all of that the rock bottom centre, or rock bottom, that's not quite the right phrase, but the absolute median of the age of the child, the type of crime, the longevity of the crime, and the kind of psychological tactics that were used by the perpetrators to retain silence and compliance in these crimes. So in a way, it made it easier because I knew I wasn't, if this makes sense, I wasn't making it up. No one would ever be. I was really concerned that people would read it and know it to be a truth and not some highfalutin fancy idea that could not be substantiated. I felt because of the delicacy of the subject matter and that it was really important to try and be as close to the truth as possible on this subject. Of course, none of us really do know, unless we are the victim or the mother of the victim in this case, exactly what is going on inside people's heads. It's interesting post-publication how many people have come forward and talked to me about these issues, and professionals as well as victims and parents of victims, and how close to the truth I managed to get it, which I guess fills me more with a sense of relief rather than anything else, that I have been emotionally truthful in the storytelling.
What inspired it?
It was inspired by... Do you know, this is a very odd analogy, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, when you go, I'm going to go and buy a new car and it's going to be this kind of car and it's going to be this colour and blah-de-blah, and no one else has got one. I haven't seen them anywhere else. And suddenly you see them everywhere. Yeah. And it's a little bit like that. So I read a very small newspaper article about a particular set of circumstances that was in the courts. And then I started seeing it everywhere. And what intrigued me about these stories that were being reported, and you have to remember when I started this book, there was no Royal Commission into anything to do with child sexual abuse. This is well before that. This is well before some of the prominent private schools, etc., were in the papers for these crimes going on. So I started to read snippets of stuff where very wealthy and powerful men were being unveiled as being perpetrators against children, or a particular child, usually often in the family environment, not necessarily a stepchild, but certainly, it may have been a close family friend's child, etc. And it just, it was a bit of a zeitgeist thing. And I just started thinking, how would you feel as a mother that this had been going on under your nose for X years and you see a thing? Or did you? And did you just block it off? Or, all those kind of questions. And that was really the genesis of it, was me trying to unravel, assuming that you really didn't see anything. How could that have happened? And then does that make it worse when you do find out the truth? And how do you possibly ever live with the guilt? Because despite the fact that you're not the perpetrator, in a way you've aided and abetted the perpetrator, and also in a way you are also a victim. And I soon came to realise through all the research that in a way you have to groom the mother in order to access the child. And I think a lot of the stuff that we've seen come out of the Royal Commission has proven that to be true, even when the person is external to the family. It is someone they trust, that the parents have put that child in the trusting care of their priest, teacher, scoutmaster, whatever the case may be, and that trust has been abused, and that often those abusers have fostered that trust in order to gain access to their victims. So I think, I guess that was where I was just intrigued about how that I would unravel that, and how would I live with myself. And going back to your earlier question about how did I live in that headspace for 10 years, with a great deal of difficulty and often sometimes anger and sadness and frustration. It was a very difficult place to be, and particularly since I did create Christina, to not be the milk of human kindness, shall we say. She isn't a fabulous, warm, adorable mother who was, she is flawed, and she is selfish in some ways and vain in other ways. But I've kind of felt in a way that I'd allowed the reader to distance themselves a little bit from her and to be able to judge her, but equally also to say it's not about whether you're a good person or a bad person or a great mother or a terrible mother. It doesn't excuse the crime.
The central story is told in flashback whilst moving forward in the present. And it's in that time when Christina is waiting for her daughter Bianca to return from overseas that she contemplates these past events. But as you said earlier, it's right from the first chapter that we know something terrible has happened. So I wanted to ask you, was that dual timeline difficult to manage whilst turning up the tension at the same time?
Actually, I have to say no, but in order to explain that answer, when I first wrote the novel, and if you've read the acknowledgements, I quite openly say that I threw the whole thing out and started again. But when I first wrote it, being a new writer who'd never written a novel in her life, I wrote it chronologically. It covers 17 years, so it's a long time frame to manage as a writer and to maintain tension, etc., as you said. And then I read a book called Sisterland, and I'm having one of those mental blanks going, I've forgotten the name of the author, amazing American author. Anyway, and I read Sisterland, and she had a similar timeline structure that I currently have. And I went, light bulb moment, of course, that's how to manage it. And so then it actually became very easy to rewrite. Once I threw out, obviously, this day and age, we don't literally throw out the manuscript. Once we file it away and open a new blank document, once I had that idea that I could actually have this Christmas, the lead up to Christmas happening at the forefront of the story, and then have the history of the story in alternate chapters, it actually made it so much easier. It solved so many problems for me that I was struggling with structurally, because having written the novel in the first place over a period of years and knowing in my heart of hearts that it was not right, but I didn't know what was wrong or how to fix it. Having spent years and years writing it, I actually did the rewrite in 4 months because I suddenly had, the structure there. And then in a way that it enabled me later on, when I was doing The Fence all of a sudden urgently because they wanted to publish it first, I knew that if you can just nail the structure, then it does make life so much easier. I'm not a plotter in the true sense, but I'm also realised that being a pantser is a very long and involved way of writing a novel. And I like to sit in the middle. I like to have an outline, and I like to know where I'm going and where it's ending, but I don't like to prescribe what's going to happen. I like to give the characters some free rein as I'm writing. So I've now become a firm plotter pantser. Because I don't recommend taking 10 years to write a novel from a marketing publicity point of view. It's really not a great strategy.
Yeah, I hear you. Another important feature of the book is this rundown property that Christina commits herself to restoring. Can you tell me about that? Was this based on a real place?
It was based on a real place. I visited this house with a friend. We were buying horses at the time, strangely enough, and these people had this property in the Blue Mountains, and oh my God, you should have seen it. We literally did drive up this driveway with, it must have been a 2 acres of Dutch irises on one side and this daffodils on the other, and it was like, oh my God. And it was just they were restoring this house, and they let us have a look through it, and it was just mind-blowingly beautiful. I was so jealous, I have to be honest. and that was the foundation for the property that they moved to.
Fantastic. Gardening is an activity that features quite largely in the Making of Christina, but also in The Fence. So does this stem from your own interest, or does this stem from, what you saw at this property in the Blue Mountains?
I have a stepmother who is an amazing gardener. I'm so insanely jealous of what a great gardener she is. And I would give my eye teeth to be a fabulous gardener. So it's really just wish fulfillment is the honest truth. We live on a property now, as you know, and I have a 2-acre garden, and I'm allowed to weed it, and I'm allowed to prune the roses, and that is the sum total of my involvement, because my husband will kill me if I did anything else. But God, I'd love to be a great gardener, and I've been addicted to Gardening Australia since it started, and I love all those country style magazines and all that whatnot. And I can bake. I will give you that one. I can. Gwen's recipes in The Fence recipes. I could tell you how to make them. But when it comes to that style of creativity, it's unfortunately not something I do. And you know what? To be a really good gardener, you so have to be passionate and have the time to do it. These gardens do not create themselves. And seriously, I've got children, I've got horses, I've got a farm, I've got work, I've got stories, I've got so many hats on. Yeah.
Well, I guess that brings me nicely to my next question. And you've spoken about living on your property. So I wanted to know whether living on the South Coast on your property has influenced or helped you as a writer, do you think?
On so many levels, the answer is yes. I think the number one thing that was noticeable from the very first week we were here is that living on acreage, and we have reasonably significant acreage, but we also, our neighbours on either side. So one neighbour's got 500 acres, another neighbour's 180, another neighbour's 160, that kind of thing. So we feel like we're, really living on 1,000 acres. So the physical sense of space is very liberating and in a way very meditative. So that is totally good for your creativity. The other thing I would say, though, and you're familiar with the area, is that it's a small community. So a lot of I've just been up into town this morning to do one thing, and I came home 2 hours later, because you run into someone, you have a cup of coffee, then someone else sees you and they pop in. So it's a very close-knit community on so many levels. So that's also been fantastic from the support for my writing, but also for some of the other things that I do as well. I work with a local publishing house as a freelance editor. I have been involved with the Friends of Milton Library. I'm blessed to have been appointed the festival director for Storyfest. There's a whole lot of things that are going on for me down here that would not have happened in Sydney.
Sure. Now, I understand further to what you've just told me that you've got a new book series coming out in 2019 called The Horse Warrior. Can you tell me a little bit about this series of books?
So Horse Warrior is, so I should go back a step and say that I interviewed Alexander McCall Smith a couple of years ago for Sydney Writers Festival, and I've always been in awe of him with his, Number One Ladies Detective Agency series and Scotland Street and all the things that he does, and he's so damn prolific. And when I was interviewing him, I was thinking about, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about going, you know what, I really admire you, and but I just don't think I could live with the same characters year in, year out and produce book after book after book. The whole series thing, I don't know, it's just so not me. And on the other side of the fence is I love my children, of course, but I don't know, being a children's writer, I don't know if I just don't know if I'm that kind of person. And then we've been vowing and declaring since we moved here. There's a very difficult bushwalk near us called Pigeon House Mountain, and we've been waiting until winter to do this walk. So anyway, long and the story short of it is we're doing this walk. I've got the knapsack on full of all the food and the drink and the whatnot for the kids, because you know what it's like with kids. You can't possibly just go there, with a bottle of water. And my husband and my son have galloped up the hill, miles ahead, leaving me with the pack and Miss 10 or 11 she was at the time. And I turned to her and I said, you know what we need? What we really need is a good mountain horse. And she laughed and said, because it's really steep, and I've been lucky enough. I've done riding through the snowy mountains and all of that, Man from Snowy River stuff. And then out of that, this little idea started in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone, which is, as you know, if you're a writer, if the idea won't leave you alone, you probably need to write it. And so I just wrote a couple of 100 words, and I happened to be talking about it with our local publisher, and he said, oh, horse books, oh my goodness, kids go nuts for horse books. I said, yeah, but, it's not one of those, bickering behind the stables, pony clubby type things. It's kind of more, I don't know, Silver Brumby meets Narnia meets The Hobbit.
Sounds awesome.
And he just laughed and he said, can you write it? Can you write it? And can I have it? And I said, well, look, you can have it on one condition. And he said, what's that? I said, there's a girl who lives locally. She was 13 at the time, who draws the most amazing horses I've ever seen. I'm so insanely jealous of people who can draw, as well as those who can garden. And I said, I'd like her to do the artwork for it. And he went, oh. So I showed him her Instagram account, and he went, oh, my goodness, she really can draw. So long and short of it is that's how it got published as an indie publishing thing rather than through a big house. And it's as the idea developed, and he was quite instrumental in fleshing out the fantasy elements of it, because that's a genre he's really fond of. The project just kind of went on from there, and suddenly I'd signed a contract for a indefinite number of horse warrior books. And the cover art, I've got to tell you, is just beautiful. I'm so overjoyed to be working with this talented young artist. It's just lovely. And the house team at the publishing house, the guy who does the production on book covers is amazing as well. And, really been wonderful to work in a creative project rather than just, here's the book, let me know when it's finished kind of thing. It's been very collaborative, which is really not something you necessarily get to enjoy with a big publishing house. So that's been really nice to do. So there's your plot, Pracy. It's Silver Brumby meets Narnia meets the horse war. I love it.
There's your elevator pitch right there.
Yeah, it is. It is. That is my standard elevator pitch. And so people kind of go, oh, so it's definitely going to appeal to horse lovers. The horses are very important in the book. And it's definitely going to appeal to people who like a bit of fantasy. There are no dragons and it's not a Harry Potter-esque thing at all. But it does follow the fate of an 11-year-old girl who's pretty feisty and pretty opinionated. Of course, she's an amazing horse rider. And we're going to join her and her friend on a very interesting life journey over the next few years. So there you go. So never say never, really, Claudine.
Indeed.
Because I'm also still writing adult fiction. It's not like I'm just doing this and I've just thrown my lot into children's fiction. I'm also structurally editing my next adult novel. So
of course you are.
Oh.
Busy lady. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's eagerly anticipating these books. So when can we expect to see book one on the shelves?
Book one is slated for the end of March next year. And I'm very excited about the project, as you can tell. So, book one is then I need to sit down. Once I finish the structural edit of my adult novel that I'm working on at the moment, then I need to sit down and write Horse Warrior 2 and 3 so that there's a Horse Warrior 2 out, within 12 months of Horse Warrior 1 being out. So that's kind of how it works. There's Jen Storer, who's a children's author, she writes the Truly Tan series, amongst other things. As she said in one of her podcasts she does YouTube ones, so what do you call that, vodcasting, on writing series for children. And she said basically that's your life for whatever period of time you've committed to. So I went, oh, well, that's great, but I also need to keep writing adult fiction. So it's going to be a busy time, I guess.
Indeed, sounds like it. Now, you mentioned Storyfest a little bit earlier, and that's something that I wanted to delve into with you just for a little bit. So you're the festival director for this new creative venture called Storyfest. Can you tell me what this is all about?
Storyfest is very simply a festival celebrating storytelling. We deliberately steered clear of calling it a literary festival or a readers and writers festival. As we know, there are a lot of those around. And we liked to embrace the whole idea of storytelling in whichever format that may come. So we have that could be film, it could be plays, it could be poetry, fiction, non-fiction, etc. So we've tried to keep it fairly broad, and the festival will be about celebrating great storytellers in whatever forum they happen to be working in. So that's actually, in a way, really liberating as a festival director. So I'm working with author Pamela Cook, as she's the program director working alongside me in terms of who we're going to be inviting to the festival. There's an amazing team behind it, incredibly talented people. And it's quite liberating going and meeting with publishers and going, we need them to be great storytellers. They need to be articulate. They need to be engaged and passionate, not necessarily that they're an award-winning writer or, that big name. And let's face it, if people want that kind of stuff, they've got plenty of platforms to do that through, Sydney Writers Festival or wherever they happen to be. And we wanted to say we're a small regional festival and we want to actually embrace what's interesting to us. So Story Festival, we had a launch event in July to set the tone, as we say, and that was a wonderful event with author Marcus Zuzak, who people would definitely know as the man who wrote The Book Thief. And I can also add, having read it, who's written the masterpiece Bridge of Clay out in October. An incredibly humble man. It was a sellout event. He stayed till 10:30 at night signing books. It was just truly wonderful. And we hope to make sure that Storyfest next June is as wonderful as the launch event was. It's a very exciting time. But as I said, there'll be beautiful dinners and great venues and a wonderful vibe. And it's such a cool part of the world to come and visit anyway. It'll just be an amazing weekend, I think.
I think so. So what dates are they? Is that going ahead?
Yeah, the festival proper is the 21st and the 22nd of June in 2019. We are in negotiations and discussions with the local schools. There will be a schools program as well that will run in the week leading up to the festival. So at this point in time, don't hold me to this, at this point in time, the Sunday is free of activities. But I'm not so sure that will last. But we will certainly be expanding over time, that the festival will always run Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But there's so many other things to do on Sunday down here, as you well know. So people will be free to have a little bit of culture with the literary festival or the storytelling festival, and then a little bit of sightseeing and lunching and all those things on the Sunday as well.
Sounds idyllic, Meredith, and an amazing opportunity for artists. So listeners who are out there, you can block that out in your calendar and make sure you head down the South Coast for that amazing festival that's going to happen there. So Meredith, if listeners wanted to connect with you or to learn more about your books, where can they find you?
The two easiest places are my website, which is the usual www, and it's meredithjaffé.com. Or my Facebook page, which is just Meredith Jaffé. And it's got the same photo on both, so you'll know it's me.
I thoroughly recommend Meredith's novels, both of which can be purchased at good bookstores or downloaded from various e-retailers. Meredith, it has been my absolute pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for having me, Claudine. It's been really lovely spending some time with you.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.